You are watching Co-op for Two. I'm Jesse. I'm here with Greg.
Thanks for having me on your channel.
And this is our review of Apollo, a game inspired by the NASA moon missions. So, let's really super quickly give you an overview of what the game is. It's a game where you've got limited communication. Mm-hmm. One player plays mission control. The rest of the astronauts are playing the astronauts. Mm-hmm. Cooperative, obviously. Comes with two missions. The more complicated one and then the easier one.
Oh, yeah,
and essentially, the astronauts are rolling dice. They're going to have to decide how to use them. They've got a certain number of turns to complete all these different stages. And mission control is keeping the ship repaired, telling the astronauts what things are in what danger. They have to spend communications tokens to communicate, so communication is very limited. And this is the screen that blocks what mission control can see and what the players can see. So that's basically it. Very different jobs. Mm-hmm. One is basically almost like the game master, the GM, and is not really making tough decisions. What you want that open somewhere?
You want the stuff on the table, right?
But anyway, I mean, you're both making decisions, but essentially the heart of the game is at the astronauts team, and mission control is just keeping stuff repaired, and when it gets in bad shape, they have to do other things to repair it. And that's it. It's a little race to get everything completed and keep the ship from blowing up. Did I miss anything? Is that that's the basic way you play?
What do you think of the theme here?
Well, that's a great question, because for me, that's the enjoyment part of this game. Thematically, not even just thematically it's cool to have this. There aren't that many games that are themed based on a real life space mission stuff, and it feels like with the mission control and the astronauts, we sort of role played it. That was the fun part of the game. The thematic part about trying to keep everything running.
Of course, I love a varied theme. I like different kinds of themes in games. And, there are definitely a lot of space-themed games, and most of them are based in science fiction, fantasy. So it is cool to have a game, and especially a cooperative game, where you're trying to do something, altruistic and true to history. Mm-hmm. And it's really cool, I think, that they do have the theme of, you're doing the Gemini mission, which was, in fact, a training mission.
Is that true?
It was basically it's like, hey, can we? Which is cool to look at that. That's kind of neat. That's on there. Mm-hmm. But it's this was to make sure things were good to go for the real mission. So we played the Gemini mission. You can look at both those playthroughs on the channel. So it's kind of cool because we did that as a training mission.
We did do it as a training mission,
right? Which is what the game says it is, right? Yep. Which is pretty cool that it has both those modes. So I love the idea.
Thematically, and the different stages are amazing. You flip them over as you achieve them. Sure. It's cool.
And there's a lot of information baked in, right, where it will tell you on these cards.
All the goals have
extracts
thematic.
From the rocket body and reattach vessels. So
the experiments have the same thing. Each experiment has a very abstract thing to do, but then has some flavor text about what each experiment actually is.
Yes, so I do. I do like a game that that could kind of teach you somewhat. So if you could see where if you were had a family and you played this with your family, and that allowed them to learn about this particular process.
This would be a hard game to play with kids.
Yeah, well, we can talk about that later. But just in terms of you learn from movies and books and your experiences in life and stuff, and so. You might remember they landed. You could you could see where you could learn a little something from this. I'm not saying it's Twilight Struggle where you've got cards for every event in the Cold War, but certainly it's interesting to see something like that. And of course, that's really it's kind of like when we played Flashpoint, where it's kind of cool when you're excited about. We're excited about completing this mission and communicating with the ground base. It's a really cool concept thematically to one player to be.
I do think
that's the mission control and the rest of the astronauts to be.
It's a very apt comparison though, because the theme is here in this game, but the things you do feel pretty far removed from the theme.
that right?
Like Flashpoint, you're like putting out the fire and
but you're
bringing
rolling
people to
dice and
rescue.
stuff the same way.
Yeah, but the things, your actions you're doing are doing these things like, okay, you're rearranging vessels, descent maneuvers, land on lunar surface. You're not doing anything like that. You're just rolling 4 3s and now you've landed the lunar. You know what I'm saying? I'm saying that the thematic stuff is there, but the actions are completely abstracted.
It has to be abstracted. Now, to me, I actually think that like thematically, like it. So I think it really works thematically because your control, your mission control, and if we just played this 2-player, but if we played a 3-player, like it would would have a sense of like one person's be able to track this stuff, and the rest of you are sort of, depending upon that person. So I like that. I think it's like, it's got to be abstract. It's just like Pandemic. You're not actually like treating diseases. You're just removing cubes, I mean, I think like you're doing each of these things and it has to be done at a precise point. That's so awesome.
Well, that is a nice part. The part about how you have a certain window upon which to get each stage.
Life support, like the most important thing is life support because that's what allows you to roll dice to like affect all the other systems. Mm-hmm. And of course, that's a thematic tie-in. The flight control, if that isn't accurate and you don't get it by the same window, that's such an important thing. Like the window of like how they slingshot around the moon and things and how like they do that stuff. It's so important to get those things done at the exact moment. And if your flight control is all screwed up, you miss the thing and you will lose the game. I actually really think a lot of those, and then of course you can't talk to your base if your communications are down. So I mean, I think I would disagree with you, Jesse. There, I think that like actually it's wonderfully thematic in that way. And of course.
Don't get me wrong. I mean, I think like the strongest part of it are the thematic parts that work. I just think like it's at a very, very high level, and it disappears almost instantly. Like what I'm saying is like I agree with you that, and the thematic part that worked the most for me was, as you described, the roles of the one person about being mission control and the communications. That's the most interesting part to me. Sort of the flavor of the communications felt thematically right. But all I'm saying is like as soon as you drop beneath the surface level, all of this stuff like the experiments all like lose their thematic.
Well, you have to
flavor.
You have to abstract things. I don't know how you could make landing the lunar module like anymore. I mean, like
I don't know. I don't have a great answer for that.
Yeah, well, I don't think there is one. I think like you have to abstract things. I think this job does a wonderful job of making up thematics. And I'll say what I think does go a long way towards that is the art and the components. Mm-hmm. But before we talk about that, if you don't, may I? I'd like to just as a quick aside with this game, like. This is one of these games, just before we started this, you looked for the designer on the box, and what did you say? You were like, is this one of those?
Just one of these games where they've hidden the designer, and it is. I'm not sure why.
They keep coming out with these games that are like mass marketed games. I think this was only a Target exclusive, maybe.
Yeah, I think you might be right.
But it's like,
we don't
understand like $30 or $40 or $35. Like, when you look at the components of this, like, there's like a slew of games coming out now that are just like $40 and it has like components that you just like, how is this possible? I mean, the art of this game, when you look at like, first of all...
Wait, are you saying this is overpriced or underpriced?
Way underpriced.
Oh, I don't know.
You don't think so? Well, I'm just surprised, like, because...
I mean, it's nice looking, I agree. But
okay. First of all, there's a lot of unnecessary stuff, but it was really cool that they have this, and there's one for the Gemini mission, which you could say it's unnecessary, which of course it is unnecessary, but you're not really paying for it. Yeah. And on top of that, like, these could just be in plastic baggies, but they are functional. This is where you have your Gemini mission cards. Both the experiments and the stuff. And then this is where you keep your Apollo stuff, which is really pretty awesome, I think. And every little bit brings it to life. You've got a screen
now there. Here's a place. Now, I'm not a huge fan of miniatures, but wouldn't it be nice to have the actual miniature for the space space capsules?
The problem there is that any space shuttle is going to, like, I don't know if that's the correct term, space shuttle, but like it's going to break into different pieces. So you'd have to have one that like.
Yeah, that would be a nice...
That would be cool, but I don't know if that would add a lot to the game. Because,
Instead, they've got these things that have to be jammed in. Okay, but
I do love the art, and I do love the fact that, like, you can see the path it takes, around slingshotting around and stuff, which is awesome. And it shows, even on this here, look, it shows the little shuttle. It shows the form that the shuttle's in, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And it is really gorgeous to take a look at, like...
that art's quite nice.
We kind of, like, like I'm looking at this... here where it's like when you land on the moon, or you're going to land on the moon, you've got this, and then you are walking on the moon, and then you're heading back. I mean, it's so cool.
It is nice in how they lay out once you do it.
And the art is really pretty,
Yeah, it is.
and there's the same for the Gemini pack, which is, I think, very cool. The fact that you have this screen is cool. Like, I mean, I think the art of this
spent some money on this stuff too.
Maybe not that necessary, but I mean, again, it's not a very expensive game, so I mean, it's cool that it comes with that stuff to show you the alerts or the comm stuff. I mean, this is functional and it has some gauges and stuff, which looks, like it's what it's supposed to do, but it's not like overly compelling to me. Like this looks like a little bit, like this here is a little bland. Maybe they should have put some distressing in there or something to make it look a little better. But I still think it looks good. I mean, the dice are functional and everything. They're nice chunky dice and like. They're easy to read and stuff, So, this could have been a little more attractive artwork, but it's definitely, for a game like this where you're supposed to be kind of moving quickly, it is quite functional. And I do like the fact that you get these, even though these stickers are a little weird, but I do like that I can kind of put them to remember things or whatever.
It is interesting that it's a pretty high quality component just to help you remember stuff.
And I mean these tokens kind of suck. I mean they don't suck. They're fine. They do what they're supposed to do, but they're they're a little
generic. Yeah,
they're really generic, and but whatever. I mean,
and then this we didn't use.
We didn't even. Well, we can talk about that in a bit, but yeah. I mean, this little extra mini game is a little weird, but I mean, again, like everything else is kind of functional. Either there are components here that I think do look quite lovely, or they do really bring that theme out, especially like this stuff.
Now, we should say we basically played two different games in a large respect, because you played the astronaut all 4 games, and I played mission control all 4 games. So we had sort of different experiences. And the other thing that we sort of didn't really have an experience with was the whole timed thing. There's a whole timed phase of this that seems like it would be relevant if you had multiple players as astronauts, but with 2 players it didn't seem...
Yeah, so that's a little... we can maybe bring that up a little bit more when we talk the meat of the game discussion. But
I do think something has to be said for the rule book.
Yeah, that's part of the components.
I mean, it was not great. It was not a great rule book.
I didn't read it,
was
so
a little, it was a little scattered. And there are things that are not clear, that aren't mentioned, like what happens if you get all the way down and you can't. You're supposed to decrease it, but you can't. And there were just quite a few places.
You could see where like if it's down there and you take damage to that system, you're supposed to take damage out of another system. If that was the case, I don't think we ever got to a crisis. So it didn't matter. But okay, so I was just going to say that again. Yeah. Well,
there were lots of little pieces that the rule book could have been much better about, and there was one really weird one where it's constantly telling you, like, a key thing is you have to do a certain number of experiments, and we had to really hunt around to find. You went into the other room by yourself to study your phone to see if you could find it, but I mean, we did come up with it, and it actually is down here when you eventually see it.
God,
but it's so bizarre for them not to say that very clearly.
8 flight stages 3.
Yeah, that's like the key experiment that tells you, it just says, you have to do the proper number. Yeah. So there were just a couple places like that, and there are a couple weird, very fiddly rules about like when you can start a stage. Does it have to be when you're on it, when you're past it, things like that.
I think just in terms of, like you said, fiddliness or whatever, I think this is a good kind of point to jump in here and say, this game has a thing that I don't generally like in a game where there's a lot of weird little mini kind of things going on, right? There's a lot of little... when you try to explain this game, it's very simple, honestly. The game itself is very simple. And once you sort of play it one game, you understand it. But there is quite a bit of weird... There's a lot of fiddly kind of oddball rules. It's a lot of odd little mini games kind of tucked into one whole game. And that's kind of...
very easy to overlook stuff. Like moving this each turn, each action.
Well, that's like one of the few jobs.
No matter who's doing that job, it's easy to overlook.
I do think like this is a game where there's lots of weird little things in it. It does seem like it'd be very easy to miss a rule or something.
No.
It's a little awkward. It's definitely, we usually like to use elegance as a term to describe a game when it's everything's sleek and works really well together. This game definitely has a bit more on the inelegance side.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's right.
I do think now talking about just in general the game, like the pacing and things, the game length itself. What did you think? I mean, the game last maybe.
Not
The
bad.
Gemini mission was maybe 30 minutes. The Apollo mission was maybe an hour. Do you think that's right?
Yeah.
So now here's something I was kind of thinking about that kind of struck me. I'm always big on like, are the decision, like I love shorter games. I love a 30 or 40 or a minute game or an hour game, because as long as there's a lot in there, because I'm like, cool, we'll play again, right? If you're just enjoying it. So, but what's interesting to me in this game is, you have the Gemini mission and you have the Apollo mission, right? And so do you want to play that 30-minute game, or do you want to play an hour game? So they're twice as, so do you think that the Apollo mission was more interesting, or really was worthwhile playing a longer game, like a double game? Did it add to that experience for you?
That's interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure it felt any different, really. I mean, it was easier, but they point out rules how to make the game harder. So I'm not sure that it might not be better just play the shorter game on a harder level difficulty rather than play the longer game.
It did seem like we had more going on just because it's a longer game. Like there's longer spaces between the moves, especially here.
But
so
they didn't feel like each stage has a different assignment, and they are, strictly, if you play it again, you'll get the exact same goals.
Oh, that's true.
In the exact same order.
That's interesting.
That's a little odd. Like for replayability, it's a little unusual that they wouldn't be
you're you're getting different dice each time and stuff, so that's kind of.
But they're not that different. They're not that, and it didn't seem like you ever had really much difficulty achieving any of those goals. I didn't feel like from watching that you were making really tough decisions.
Well, I guess
you were making decisions.
I do, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do kind of think that, like, for sure, the 30-minute game, you're making decisions, right? Like you're absolutely deciding, where do I want to risk? Do I want to tie these dice up here? Do I want to try to get some of these plus or minus tokens so that I can affect the rolls? Do I want to wait on that until I maybe roll a better thing? Or do I want to try to, like, take a little more damage on the ship now and then next round just push to repair? I think that there was, for a game like of this length, especially the Gemini mission, I felt like I was making some interesting decisions.
You just made me think of something, though, that's very interesting. We often talk about these games, like you just brought up this question, like, do I want to risk more damage to the ship or do this? Like, that kind of decision, those trade-offs, and especially because of this time thing, can be very interesting. But now, one of the weird things about this game is you have a hard time seeing what the real damage is to the ship.
Yeah.
And we have to do some communication, but that seems like that's cutting against that. Like, one of the joys of these games is like trading off the risk for this. Like, let the ship get a little more injured to do this. But in this game, you're sort of depending on me to tell you what you have to do in some sense. Like, if I tell you this is low, so I feel like that might take away some of the interesting decision that you would normally make about...
What do you mean, like you're spending your comms tokens?
I mean, the communication is the most interesting part for me, but I'm just saying, like...
For your role.
Right, but I'm just saying exactly what you're saying about how you're sort of trading off letting the ship get more injured to do this. Normally, that's an interesting decision one makes in these kinds of games. But in this game, it seems like it's going to be hard for you to make a clever decision about that, given that you have a hard time seeing what the actual state of the ship is.
That's an interesting thing, whereas it allows you to tell, I'll say, like, hey, like, I want to do some repairs or something, and then you can feed me the information, like, hey, the power distribution is really damaged. Okay, that's going to be the thing I'm going to do now. And it's kind of an interesting choice when I have a bunch of dice, and I'm like, well, I mean, I'd rather just repair something so that I don't wait, you know what I mean, because you're going to keep taking that damage, which is kind of an interesting part of the game, is to decide, like, well, I'm going to end the day, even though I have more actions, more dice I can spend, which is going to result in more damage. Because when we were looking at the rulebook, we were trying to figure out, that was one clever thing where I'm like, why wouldn't you just always re-roll the dice?
So you can choose when to stop taking actions and re-roll.
Because actions, you just have a limited amount of actions. I mean, you have, like, whatever, what did we say, 40 actions or something before?
20 in the first one.
And 40 or something in the second one. So it's like, you just, that's all the actions you're going to get, so you want to be optimized. But every time you choose to roll your dice, you're only going to fill at most 10 of the 15 spaces.
So damage happens to the ship each time you re-roll. Yeah, it's clever.
It's a clever little system. For sure. So As far as the pace, this is another kind of interesting thing to me about this game. When we were playing, like, so normally there's a timed element to this game, but which was weird because I mean, you're supposed to time it 4 minutes per your action expenditure part, but we didn't even really do it because in the first couple of games, like, I would go through 3 turns before we would need,
with
need
2
to stop.
players, it's not relevant.
It really
but
wasn't
maybe
relevant
with a bunch of players.
Yeah, it might be. But it's interesting because this style of game, because of some of the simplicity of it, the stress is supposed to come from rolling the dice and then just, I got to move fast, right? Like, because that is out the window because but it's kind of cool in another way, like maybe unintentionally in the design, because like the pace of the game was so steady. Like, I felt like we were really like, not like we were really astronauts, but everything felt like paced in that way where I'm like, what do we need to do here? Okay, like I just felt calm, like sort of like you would on a space station. You'd be like, you wouldn't be frantic. You'd be like, mission control, we've got a problem. You know, you've had a lot of training, right? Like, should we repair this? Yep, we're gonna have to, follow these. I see, yes.
Yeah, but listen to what you're saying. You're saying, here's a game that doesn't do any of the things that we almost always say that cooperative games should do. Ramp up the tension, make the pacing.
Well,
instead, it's a completely calm game, calm through the whole time.
It really was calm.
Well, can I make the case that the reason that was fun was the same reason I enjoyed our playthroughs, was that we were sort of role-playing mission control and the astronauts, and for me, the fun was that sort of role-playing element, and I am agreeing with you that part of why it was fun is because it was sort of calm. It was sort of like we were doing our jobs, we were well trained, is exactly what you're saying for it. But I don't know if that's what I normally want in a game, or if I want to play it multiple times. Like, as an experience, it was very enjoyable. But it didn't have that tension. Like, the ship never was getting worse and worse and worse. We were able to get it back up.
Well, now you don't like time games.
No, I
don't. But the fun of the time game is that like you like gotta go, oh, go, yeah, go, quick, like it's like that sense of urgency that and everybody's working together like quickly, and this game, it's timed, and it's weird that's another one of those little weird spots in the game where like you're not timed for putting up, for all these segments, and then okay, now we start the time phase. It's very strange. Again, like I think I'd rather just not have that in there.
I'm not sure that it's really needed. Yeah.
Again, that we're not having that conversation, other players and I, when we're playing 2-player. Although, like, I kind of feel like if you work, let me ask you that, because, like, do you think, like, this is missing something, or do you think if there were 3 astronauts, it would be, like, underwhelming and uninteresting?
Well, it's hard for me to be objective about that, because I really don't like playing these co-op games with more people. But so you know the rules. If more players play, you just take turns. Like you say, I'm going to go here, and then the next person does an action. I'm not sure why that has to be timed. It feels like you could still do it.
Do you think that makes the game more fun with more players?
It wouldn't make it more fun for me. No. What about you?
Well, it's interesting because you would think in this game, like my initial thought is, of course, if you had 2 or 3 astronauts and they were discussing things, it would make more sense in the scope of this game that your mission control role would make more sense because we're discussing as a team and then you can give us information or whatever. But in the reality is that like when I'm sitting here trying to decide what to spend my actions on, I'm thinking, all right, I'm going to do these to go to this and this to go to this. But if I just put one and then the next player put one, I would hate it. It would be really...
Your whole thing is coordinating. Like, if I do this, then I can do this.
Right. And so if you take that away, it's sort of like... but then again, like, I don't know as it really makes... Like, my initial thought is that you would want more astronauts and less. But I actually think it, ironically, maybe works best as a 2-player game. And I'll tell you this, like, if I were in Jesse's role, I would think this wasn't even a game.
Well, this is a good time to bring up one of our real differences we found. When we talk about games, occasionally there'll be a game where there's someone who's not really playing, who's sort of running it. And one of the things we've learned about the 2 of us is that I quite enjoy being removed and not and just running the game, even if I'm not making super interesting decisions. So for the 2 of us, this is sort of a good match because I sort of enjoy doing the bookkeeping, and I don't mind, although I wouldn't want to play this often.
Yeah, so I do want to mention that like
But you would hate this.
I would
You would hate it.
forget it. I played one time and I'd be like, never again.
Yeah.
Why would I play this? I want to play the game with somebody. And not to say that you don't have anything to do, but what's interesting too is we kind of talked about the difficulty and the pacing and stuff. Is that like, this game seems to have a real snowball problem. If you keep things going well, then you don't get to problems. But these crisis cards, there's this whole aspect of the game, this other little mini game that you have to like put these, if you want to grab that and show.
Yeah,
like,
but boy,
we
talk about like a
never
little
needed to do
tacked
it.
on mini game that is nothing. I mean, that just
So
feels
what's
wrong
interesting to me though is that like, I mean, if you can keep things going well, okay, then you never need to have these crises. So what happens is it's sort of like one of those kind of games where like if things get bad, they just snowball into insanity and you lose. But if you just keep it never from getting to that point, then you're GTG. You never have a problem. You're good to go. So it is kind of like one of those. I mean, I never felt any sense of stress, like at all. Now, one thing that sorry, do you want to make any point there?
Yeah, I mean, you said it. You would hate being in this role. This is a little bit like bookkeeping. Yeah. No, I guess I don't have too much.
One thing that seems to drive your enjoyment of games more than anything is memorable moments. And do you think that this game?
Well, yes. Okay, so that's good. So for me, the enjoyment of this game, before we even get to the memorable moments part, the whole enjoyment about this game was the limited communication, the form of the limited communication. Now, normally I don't like limited communication games. It's not that, or I don't prefer them. I like being able to talk and plan. And this game, we're not allowed to talk and plan and coordinate. But as an experience, I love the experience games. And this was a unique experience. I mean, if you watch our playthroughs, we basically role played it which could be very annoying to watch, but it was fun to sort of role play.
Yeah, it's like the ultimate passive aggressive like game of all time. It's like, Mission Control, if you would have given me that information last round, then Jesse will be like, well, Apollo, if you had done it, it's like this funny.
We have talked this calling these passive aggressive is a nice way to say it because we've talked about there's been other cooperative. It's Cahoots. Now in Cahoots,
I know what you're gonna say.
Yeah, what I'm gonna say is that, especially when you play co-op, you look for places where you can needle the other person and make it into your own semi-co-op. And we kind of had our fun with that, like needling the other person for putting our mission at risk. And so for me, as a game, not so great. But as an experience, as a fun experience.
There's this game UgTech that I played with my played with my family.
Inflatable.
Yeah, and you kind of bop them on the head or whatever. And like there's some lines in that game that you say, and my family will. They don't play games really ever. I mean, I played like 2 years ago. I played them, but like they'll remember moment. Like it kind of becomes part of your like, and even just stupid things like where it just becomes part of your interaction. Like whenever we say and or like. My wife and I are like, Andor, because that's what we call Villages of Andor. And so, like, it's just kind of becomes part of your life or whatever. And, you could imagine, this, like, Houston, did you notice that, like, you handed me the wrong soda when we were at the store? You can see where, like, that kind of thing, like, becomes, like, and we could laugh about it.
That was the fun part about it. And the other thing we've talked about before that I find especially enjoyable in these kinds of games, and it's not that common, is... when you've got a role, when you've got your unique role to play. And this game really has that. Like, I felt like, even though my job was not that critical, but I felt like this is my job. This is my role. And it was satisfying to have that role that only I got to do.
So it's interesting.
And it was essential. Like, you can't not do it. You can't not have me doing my role.
So I guess I'm going to make a couple of broader points about the game, kind of leading into the final thoughts, unless you kind of want to.
Yeah.
So the game itself is sort of, it's strange because it's a little obtuse, right? Like there's a lot of like little oddball, maybe that wasn't the right word, but like there's all these little odd rules and fiddly natures and like little mini games and things that kind of make it hard to wrap your head around the game to begin with. But ultimately the game is quite easy. I mean, we played within 2.5 hours, we learned, set up, played 4 games. Right, roughly. And
we only made a couple dozen mistakes each playthrough.
So I mean, it's not that elegant, but I do feel like, and it's weird because every time we play it, you pointed out is going to be the same. So you really can't approach it and do different strategies. But while I was playing it, you know, again, I would never want to play your role. And if I were you, I wouldn't want to play the game ever again. But while we're playing it, I do find it enjoyable to decide what, you know, I was communicating with you. I was saying, hey, what do we need? And you were telling me what we needed or what systems should be fixed or whatever. And it was an enjoyable little game of like allocating my dice to like.
It wasn't. You did feel like those were interesting decisions where to put your
absolutely
dice.
Because it had a definite push your luck element to it where I was like, I'm not gonna because I don't want to lock my dice in. I'm gonna risk rolling a better assortment. And then sometimes I was like, well, if I spend this die now, I can get myself some plus or minuses, and then I have enough to spend all those on the on the goal card that I needed to do.
Okay.
So I definitely felt like that as a game was pretty fun. The Gemini 2 mission, or excuse me, the Gemini mission, that's not Gemini 2, was quite enjoyable and very short, like in terms of like, you get pretty much the game out of that. But I honestly, like the Apollo mission itself, I liked having a little more time to develop some of that stuff. So I actually kind of like that more. And I do think like, in an hour-long game, it did kind of offer me some interesting choices in this nice little dice game, and the banter that we had, and I'm in love with the theme, and I actually think they did a really good job capturing that, you know, and it like makes me think of things that I enjoy or I like I like thinking about the moon landing, I like thinking about the things separating, I like thinking about the experiments they're doing, I like thinking about communicating with Houston, right, and like, I like things kind of having problems and stuff. You could see this game honestly like having like more expansions, which were additional missions, right? Like I mean, the Apollo 13 would be a pretty shoe-in for one, right? Like maybe a harder.
You could absolutely see other missions, although again, like the two missions did not feel very different. To me.
No.
Just
one
little
just longer. That's it.
The goals seemed very abstract, very generic.
But I do like the way it looked and stuff. I think like you know, some of the components look a little bit like a game you would get in a mass market game in the 80s or something like some of this, you know, which we don't really see, like these plastic things or whatever. Sorry, but like that you would see in like a game like that from the 80s or something. You know what I mean? Like that sort of thing where it's like, here's this plastic screen or whatever. But I do like more for like the art here and the fact that you can see this path of the shuttle and like all these art pieces. I really like satisfying turning them over and seeing. I mean, but it wasn't really a challenging experience, right?
Yeah, well, you can make it harder, so it can be made harder.
Now let me ask you this. Do you feel like turning up the difficulty would have made it any more enjoyable?
I think the fact that our last game, we never had a crisis. When we never had this, means we were missing some of the stress of the game that might be more enjoyable if that happened.
So I'm kind of, I mean, definitely for you, it would have been cooler to like have these things pop up, but it wouldn't have made I don't think it would have made my decisions any easier. It actually would have just been like,
playing this mini game is not appealing to me. I was happy not to have to deal with that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess as a half an hour or an hour long playthrough, it does provide. It's kind of like pleasant. I think if you played a game that was like soul crushingly difficult or really mentally taxing and frustrating, then it wouldn't be enjoyable. Like it would be like, you know what I mean? Like you play a game like where you just like, it's like 8 hours, like you play like a long 8 hours Seventh Continent game and you die and you're like, oh, I'm stressed, and you're like, well, I don't know, I want to go home yet. Well, let's play this. It's almost like a cool down in a way, you know?
Yeah, I mean,
which is probably not what they were intended, by the way. They probably wanted you to stress and do these crises and stuff, and, you know, and be like feeling the pressure of the timer or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I find myself sort of half agreeing with you about this game and then half disagreeing, and maybe that's just the different roles we play. But for me, it's sort of like it doesn't hit that sweet spot. Half of the stuff works, but then it feels overly fiddly and convoluted, some of the stuff that takes away from its role as a 30-minute, 40-minute quick game. Like maybe it didn't need some of this complicated stuff.
What do you want to? Are you ready?
I'm ready to rate it. I'm ready to rate it, but why don't you rate it first?
Okay, so short game length with some good choices, which I like. a theme that I absolutely am like 100% in love with. Some very attractive art that's evocative, and the feeling of an actual kind of a cool, haven't really seen it a lot before, board game thing where like you're communicating with, with a. I got that sense. I got the sense that I was on the mission and you were on Earth, kind of directing me and helping me along. So I found like I feel very positively about this game. I feel really positive actually about it, just because all those things are very fun. But in reality, the game really isn't that great of a game. It just happens to have some things that I really enjoy. I mean, this definitely falls in the thing where, like, if you were in love with this game and said, I want to play 10 more times, I'd be like, okay. But if you said, we're never going to play this again, I'd be like, okay. I mean, in reality, like, it almost makes me a little hungry for a game with a little more meat on it,
This is so interesting. It's interesting how we're going to split on this. So what would you... I just mean like,
no, it's okay. I mean, I could see a game, not using this, not using this dice, not using this. But
you want to get rid of the dice?
No, but I mean like a game that is essentially like you go through the different stages and you go through this path, and it's a different. I'm saying like I want to play a different game like that. Like I want to see a game that deals with that's a cooperative or what I mean. You
want the theme and the feel, but
like I want these stages like if these are all part of the game and these experiments and the missions and stuff, and it's this map and everything, but there's just kind of a different engine to it. You know what I mean? Like a different like action management, pushing cubes around, like playing cards or what I don't know, whatever. But like I really I like that. But again, like I could play it again or I could leave it forever, I suppose, which is. I guess I'm going to give it a... I do think it succeeds at some stuff. It's really hard for me because I do like so much about this game. Again, as a really light game, but it's hard to like really say it deserves to be up there with some of the other stuff. I'm going to give it a 5.5. I think that's the most comfortable for me.
Okay. Well,
I hate to do that too, though, because I do really love this aspects of it.
So what's so interesting, my thoughts were congealing as you were giving your summary, and the way you summed it up, sort of like you love the theme and the stuff, and you love the communication element, but you wanted a different engine underneath, and you wanted more of a meaty game. And I had almost the same but opposite reaction. I felt like I agree with your whole premise. I love the theme, the space, I love the communication. I wanted a different engine underneath. But the engine I wanted underneath was less of a meaty game and more of a streamlined social game. Because for me...
Oh, I would totally play that too, by the way.
Like the idea of mission control, talking to the space thing that's trying to achieve something, but less of a mechanical, fiddly thing, and more of a sort of lean into the problems communicating and the difficulty of trying to coordinate stuff. That experience was fun to me. This idea that I was on the ground and we were trying to...
I would agree with... I 100% agree with that as well.
So we sort of want 2 more games out of this. Not this game, not this engine, but we sort of both want more of this upper level part of theme and lower level part of communication difficulty, but then 2 different games. One a meatier game and one a sort of social game.
I mean, I do think that there are people... I mean, again, I don't have really... I'm not really... I do like the game. I mean, I do feel positively about it, and I do think that there are going to be people that are going to enjoy it.
Yeah.
I don't know how much replayability people will get out of it.
That concerns me.
Honestly, but like for whatever, it's like, what did you say? It was $30? I can't remember.
Yeah, something like that.
$30 or $35 or something. Yeah, buy it for $35, $40. Play it. Yeah. Play it 5 or 10 times and get rid of it.
Yeah. Well, so I rate it lower than you. I rated about maybe a 4. And
what do you mean maybe?
A 4. I rated a 4.
There you go.
And I have a hard time...
Show some conviction, Jesse.
I have a hard time figuring out who I would recommend this to. Because it's it's confusing enough, it's convoluted enough that you have to really spend some time with the rulebook and learn it. You couldn't play this with a young... I don't think a family... A young group would play it. One person has to be willing to do this.
Terrible.
And this seems like a fairly sophisticated set of decision making. You'd have a hard time giving it to family. And so, yeah, And I don't know, with multiple players doing that, having to communicate and
probably
doing
lose a
timed,
lot.
I just have a hard time.
I guess maybe
thinking
I should
about
have
a
rated it
group.
lower because if I were your role, I would not want to play it.
You'd
does
have to
require
have
one
someone, yeah. So I don't know who to recommend this to. But
other
I hope they
games-
keep making these.
Yeah.
Well, the one game that I would recommend, if you want that itch of sort of science, non-fiction-y, hard
I'm not gonna
science,
agree with this.
you're not going to agree with this, yeah.
No way.
But if you want to scratch that itch of technology and science, Terraforming Mars has a really good feel of science and with a really strong game engine underneath.
Like 3-hour game that's like meaty as anything, like completely different than this game in every possible
But it does scratch that science itch.
I would disagree. I don't think it really brings to life anything for me. I feel like it's so dry and themeless to me in that game. Like that's one thing I was regretting.
I disagree with that.
But this, like,
you're terraforming Mars, you're raising temperature, oxygen.
I will say something that I
You're
feel
wrong
like
on this one.
Okay, well, we disagree, and that's fine. It's okay to have a different opinion.
One person can be wrong. It's okay.
Okay, Houston. But I will say that there is a game, Space Cadets Dice Duel, which does a great job. I mean, it's got all these mini games and stuff too, but it really, like, it does give you the sense of being like having to be on time. You're really stressed. Go! Bring up our shields. Bring the ship. Your two ships fighting each other, and you have 4 players on each side.
And there's one as the captain.
One's
right?
the captain standing high, and then there's 3 people, crewmates, and you're each in charge of different aspects of the ship. Load me up some torpedoes in the aft. Like get me some jamming over here. Engineer, give me more energy into the shields or whatever. And you're all like, and then the other ship is turning. You're like, Captain, they're turning. Bring us about, fire. And it has that sense of like working together on a ship. You're all making these things happen, and it gives you that sense of like stress about the time. And I think this game wanted to impart.
Yeah, that's
probably the best.
That's a good thought.
And then another game I would say would be Escape the Curse of the Temple. Kind of has that rolling of the dice and the time of like we gotta move. Although the theme is completely different. But I was thinking about that game because the timed element of this made me feel like you were trying to make these decisions under the gun. And those 2 games definitely give me that sense of the time is at opposition. I wouldn't actually link this in terms of thematics to any other game in terms of recommendations because that's what probably the best thing going for this game is that I don't know of any other game that's like this. Right? Like most science fiction games or games, dealing with space exploration or space and stuff are not science fiction. It's like you're in space and it's one of the 4 acts games where you're like. But this is what I really like.
Can you think of any other games where there's an interesting communication issue? Of like limited communication, but one person like talking
I feel like,
to people.
Yeah, actually, I just played a game recently, First Contact, where there's like this communication is very much like the movie Arrival, which is a 10 by the way. If you've never seen Arrival, it's an amazing, very emotional movie. It's basically the same scenario of what's going on in the game. It's you're trying to communicate, your aliens trying to communicate information to humans.
That sounds interesting. When did you play
really
this?
Cool. I don't know, before the pandemic. So.
Oh, okay.
But it was somewhat recently. That game is really cool, but I know there's a number of other games that kind of deal with that. I mean, you can even stretch it to say something like Codenames is like you're trying to communicate a piece of information to people or whatever. So I do really like that. You could see a situation where this would be like Apollo 13 and you would be trying to like guide the players and have a greater role in guiding the players to kind of fix problems that they weren't understanding.
I mean, I am very intrigued by this idea of a game where you're having trouble communicating and you have to sort of coordinate through very limited communication.
There's definitely other games. I just can't think of anything else at the moment. But yeah, so that's... So
5.5 and 4. I mean, not exactly high ratings.
Again,
I enjoyed the experience of our playthrough. It just doesn't appeal to me as a game.
Again, I had a fine time. I would not have enjoyed it if I were you, and I do love the theme so much. So, that's our thoughts, I suppose. Wow, that was a pretty
concise for us.
For us.
If you like what we're doing, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. And anything more to say? I guess we'll see you.
I feel like this is going to be one of those ones where I'm going to have some great insight, but it's going to be after
While you're in bed, you're going to jump up and realize what you should have said.
Well, Houston, are you ready to sign off?
I'm ready to sign off.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, we'll see you next time.
find myself oftentimes like looking at my glass, like picking my glass and going, "Oh, it's empty." It happens, like,
I have to.
it happens for
Once you
times.
start, you can't stop. So even if it's empty, you still have to. This is gonna take a few times. Get ready. Hello, hello. Today on Caught for Two, Greg and I travel back in time to the 1960s to. What are we doing? We're helping.
Oh boy, I really thought that was going to be a one shot. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you say I'm back to the 1960s, and doing the Apollo moon mission.
Doing the Apollo moon mission.
Doing isn't the right word.
No, not the technical term. Here we go.
Executing.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
okay.
We're waiting.
I love the different strategies. Like, Greg comes over, he's like, all right, today we're supposed to do Lord of the Rings. I didn't prepare anything. I'm going to sit here for half an hour and I'm like, Greg, you take all the time you want. You take all the time you want. I'm just going to do some of my stuff. You do. And I get in here and like the moment, there's like a moment of silence. Greg's like, we're waiting.
It's not wrong.
How did you feel about the gameplay overview? You said you wanted to keep that short. Do you think I did an okay job of keeping it short? It's like pulling teeth to get compliments out of you.
I don't know how the fuck that thing fits back in this box, by the way.